Hey Crossroads, Pastor Luke here. Welcome to the new year and to our next Bible study. Before we get fully into it, I got a couple of housekeeping things. One, it's been a little while, and this was supposed to get out to you just a little bit sooner, but we had a couple of delays. We had a couple of things that pushed us back, but we are ready to hit 2021 running. We're ready to get into the swing of things. So I'm going to do an overview of Israel. We're going to kind of take a look at some of the leaders and some of the high-level things. This is not for sure set in stone yet. But the kind of concept is we'll be in Genesis. We'll be going up through to the exile of the people of Israel. If you don't know what that means, hang on. We'll make more sense of that. Here are some examples of people who we'll be looking at who kind of pop up at different points along the way. Not sure that each of these gentlemen might end up being their own kind of episode, but it might turn out to be that way. Again, we'd love to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to post your questions below on the YouTube video. Feel free to send me an email, anything like that, and I would do my best to answer some questions, allow you to help dictate some of the direction that we're going. And while we're at it, if you are really interested in Old Testament, in history, and some of those things, then our Crossroads Bible Institute, starting very soon from when you hear this video, is looking at Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. It's a much more in-depth process than this. There's a lot more information, longer lessons. If that is something that you'd like to pursue for your own growth and to encourage your personal understanding of the Bible and of the story of God's people, then I would love to get you connected into that. There's no charge, but there is a book that you need to have. Anyway, feel free to reach out and let me know. And without further ado, we are going to begin by looking at the patriarchs. The patriarchs of the nation of Israel is a big fancy term that is basically used for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sometimes it refers to the fathers of the 12 tribes, but typically when we say the patriarchs, we look at Abram, Isaac, Jacob. And so this is a great place to start an in-depth dive. We're actually going to back up just one person. Let me introduce a concept to you before I explain exactly what I meant by that. There's a word in the Hebrew called toledot. Now, it appears 10 times in Genesis, and it's not super critical unless you really want to dive into a study. And you can see if you read through this text, each time and each place that it appears. And the reason that it's significant, the only reason that I bring it up, is because each time this word shows up, it's kind of a new section. You could almost think of it as a new chapter. Again, remember, you've heard me say this before, there's no chapters and verse in the original writing. But in Genesis, this word toledot is almost like new chapter. The word means generation or generations. And the only one that I want to draw our attention to right now is the sixth time that it appears. And it refers to Terah. These are the generations of Terah, or Terah. Who is that, you might ask? Well, that's a great question. It's actually Abraham's dad. And we don't often get a lot of story about Abraham's dad. We don't get a lot of information covering him. He is not one of the patriarchs. He's not one of the founders of the nation of Israel. If you were to talk to even a modern day secular person from Israel, an Israeli, they would not track back to Terah necessarily. They would look back at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, at these guys, and those names are often said together like that. You'll see numerous times in the Bible, even in the New Testament, the God of my fathers, when said by a Jewish person in the Bible, are referring to these three gentlemen. So then why would we start by looking at Abraham's dad? Well, because I think it's really interesting. And because for whatever reason, the Bible, the generation starts with Terah, starts with him, not an Abraham. And if you were to go over to chapter 11, like this, you would read it something like this. This is the account, this is the toledot, these are the generations of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, I didn't go through a bunch of genealogies because honestly, those can be a little tough. And a lot of people who start January intending to read the Bible from cover to cover don't make it past the genealogies. So I didn't think it was a great place for us to start. But what does happen, what is of note, is it always says father, son, father, son, father, son. So-and-so begat so-and-so if you're old school. And it just goes, dad, first child. But for whatever reason, when we hit Terah, we get his 3 sons. We get like this zoom in effect. And we'll hear more about each of these sons. And Haran was the father of Lot, verse 28. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans. Haran died in the old land, in the home country. He died in the other place. He died in the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Little setup. We understand here that it's not a great time. Children are supposed to pass after their parents. Meanwhile, Abram, Nahor, both married. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. We'll hear more about her later. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah was her sister. Asics were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. Just getting kind of a visual picture of the way that the family is a little bit interconnected. But Sarah was unable to become pregnant and had no children. One day, Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abraham's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, who Haran had already passed away, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. All of this was said to bring you to this point, so you follow me. He was headed for the land of Canaan. He was headed to the promised land as all of the Jews would understand it. Now, we don't have any verses talking about this land being promised to Terah, but he's headed to the promised land. The significance of that, the literary significance, the signal to any of the ancient hearers and listeners, don't miss that. Because if you miss how significant that was, then the rest of this is kind of like, yeah, whatever, who cares about Terah? He was headed to Canaan. Being headed to Canaan, it's almost synonymous in the Bible with like heading toward God, heading toward the promise, heading toward the presence of God. There's a whole lot of stuff that isn't said, but what is implied is that Terah somehow is on the mission of Abram before it passes to Abram, that his job is to go to Canaan. And I think that we can reasonably infer that this is a God-motivated rationale. This isn't just a random. He decided to pack up his house, pack up his son, pack up his nephew, or his grandson rather, who he would be responsible for, and just head somewhere. He was like he threw a dart at a map and said, let's head this way. But, and listen to this, and this is where I think we lose the story of Terah and why it's not a thing, why he's not a patriarch, why he's not a founder. But they stopped at Haran and settled there. I'm going to infer they didn't run into a place that was already named Haran after his deceased son, but when Terah decided to settle and stay put, he named the new place after his late son. And really, this is the end of Terah's story. This is where we pause. It says, Terah lived another 205 years and died while still in Haran. What I think we can infer and presume is a following after God, even though we don't have all the verses, even though we don't have it all spelled out. A going with God's leading. He stopped. He settled. He stayed put. The Bible indicates that this is the story of him and his generations, yet his role seems to be kind of a nobody. And there are different references to him way later, that come way later in other books of the Bible, that refer to Terah as an idol worshiper. And it seems to me that we can look at him as someone who made some steps towards God, that he was endeavoring to get closer, but he never did. He never finished. He never pursued. He never pushed through whether it was the pain of the passing of his son, whether it was old age. I mean, he wasn't that old. He lived for 200 more years. Whatever excuses, whatever things he had, he started heading towards the promised land, and he settled. If I could get us a little bit up in your business for this brand new year, a little bit honest about me, maybe we settled. Maybe last year didn't go the way it was planned, right? No maybes about it. It didn't. And now we have an opportunity to head toward promised land or to settle. Can I encourage you not to settle? Church, could you be with me? Could we continue on? Could we press forward? We're going to look at a whole bunch of more Bible characters in the next couple of weeks. They all have issues. They all have faults and failings, but probably none bigger than they stopped and settled. I don't want us to be a settling church. I don't want to be one who settles, and I don't want you to settle. Rather, what I want 2021 to be is a year of recovery, of taking back the things that were lost, of restoration, of newness and freshness. So while this is only our first episode, I want to close us in a word of prayer. I want to encourage each and every person that we would focus on what God has for us in this year. And I pray that this would be a part of it, that Bible study would be a part of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be my videos on YouTube, but that you would make effort to grow in your understanding, to grow in your relationship with God. So Lord Jesus, thank you for this opportunity to be together again with brothers and sisters, God, to be with the family of Crossroads. I pray that you would help us. God, we need your strength. We need your encouragement. Lord, we need your uplifting and your intervention. If we're left to ourselves, if we try to do it on our own, then we'll stop and we'll settle. But God, I pray that you would enable us to continue on the paths that you set out for us, that adversity and hardship and circumstances would not knock us off of your path. I pray that you would strengthen us, God, physically, spiritually, emotionally, help us to continue to pursue you because we know that it is what is best for us. We know that there is still a promised land for us today. There is a promised presence and a richness and a closeness with you. Jesus, I ask it in your name. God bless Crossroads. I'll see you next time.